All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are digging into a question that touches, well, pretty much everything in your financial life. Who actually sets interest rates? And how in the world do they do it? It can feel like these numbers are just pulled out of thin air, right? Like some banker in a skyscraper just decides. But the truth is, there's a really powerful and actually pretty elegant logic behind it all. And to get it, you kind of have to start thinking about money in a completely new way. That's the key right there. Just like there's a market for cars or avocados, there is a market for money. And every market has the same basic parts: a supply, a demand, and a price. So what's the price of money? It's the interest rate. To figure out how that price gets set, we need to follow the clues. So our first clue is to figure out why on earth we even want to hold on to cold, hard cash. I mean, you could be investing it and earning a return, right? So why keep it in your wallet? Well, this goes back to the brilliant economist John Maynard Keynes. He gave us something called the liquidity preference theory. And look, it's a fancy name, but it's for a super simple idea. We just like having cash on hand. It's liquid. It's easy to spend on stuff we need right now. Think about it. You can't buy a cup of coffee with a government bond. Cash is just convenient. But of course, there's a trade-off. Holding on to cash, which earns you basically nothing, comes at a price. And economists call this an opportunity cost. By holding that cash, you are actively giving up the money you could have been making if you'd bought an asset like a bond instead. So here's the absolute heart of the matter. The interest rate is the price of holding money. Think about it. When interest rates are super high, it's really expensive to keep cash stuffed in your mattress because you're missing out on a huge return. But when rates are low, the price of holding cash is cheap. It doesn't cost you much to have it handy. Okay, so this graph shows that idea perfectly. This is the money demand curve, and you'll see it slopes downward. That vertical axis is the price, the interest rate, and the horizontal one is the amount of money we all want to hold. So when the rate is high, the price of cash is high, and we don't want to hold very much of it. But as that rate falls, cash gets cheaper to hold, and our demand for it goes way up. Simple as that. All right, so that's the demand side of the market. We've got our first clue. But, a market needs two sides to work. So let's investigate our second clue. Where does the supply of money come from? Now, this is where the market for money gets a little weird and different from the market for, say, coffee. With coffee, if the price goes up, farmers will grow more of it. But the supply of money, it doesn't respond to the price at all. Instead, it's controlled by one single, incredibly powerful player, the central bank. For the US, that's the Federal Reserve. And because the central bank is in charge, the money supply curve is just a straight vertical line. The Fed basically decides, okay, this is how much money is going to be in the system, and that's it. It doesn't matter if the interest rate is 10% or 1%, the amount of money supplied stays fixed, at least until the Fed decides to change it. So let's recap. We've got our two clues, a demand curve that slopes down and a supply curve that's just a straight vertical line. Now for the big reveal. Let's put these two clues together and finally solve this puzzle. And boom, there it is. The interest rate is set right here, at point E, where the supply of money crosses the demand for money. This sweet spot is called the equilibrium. It's the one point where the amount of money people want to hold is exactly equal to the amount of money the Fed has put out there. And that gives us our equilibrium interest rate, which we call I star. Okay, so that's the magic point. But what happens if the rate isn't there? What if it's too high or too low? What invisible forces drag it back to that exact spot? Because this isn't just a suggestion, it's a really powerful market force at work. Let's say the interest rate is way too high. Well, at that high rate, nobody wants to hold cash, right? They'd much rather own bonds that are paying a ton of interest. So there's an excess supply of money, too much cash lying around. What do people do? They take that extra cash and they rush out to buy bonds. All that demand pushes bond prices up. And here's the crucial lick. When bond prices go up, their interest rates go down. And that keeps happening until the rate falls right back to our equilibrium point. Now let's flip it. What if the rate's too low? Well, hoarding cash is super cheap, so everybody wants more of it than is actually available. We have an excess demand for money. So to get their hands on more cash, people start selling off their other assets, like bonds. This flood of bonds onto the market pushes their prices down. And when bond prices fall, their interest rates rise, driving the market right back up to equilibrium. See, it's a perfect self-correcting system. So this market for money is always pushing the interest rate back towards that equilibrium. But that equilibrium point isn't set in stone. It can move. And that's what we need to look at next.
Yeah, the rate you see in the news doesn't just sit there, it's always changing. And it really only changes for one of two reasons. Either our collective desire for cash changes, which shifts the whole demand curve, or the central bank steps in and changes the amount of money in the system, shifting the supply curve.
Okay, check this out. On the left, picture the whole economy growing. People are making more money, they're spending more money, so they need more cash to make all those transactions happen. That shifts the entire demand curve to the right. And look, the new equilibrium interest rate is higher. Now on the right, you see the central bank's power in action. If the Fed decides to pump more money into the economy, that vertical supply line shifts to the right. And with more cash floating around, the new equilibrium interest rate is now lower. So let's just boil it all down. Our demand for money, that's driven by us, by the health of the economy. The supply of money, that's a lever pulled directly by the central bank. And the interest rate, the price of money, is just the dynamic result of these two massive forces constantly pushing and pulling against each other. And getting this mechanism is really the key to understanding so much of modern economics. The fact that a central bank can just decide to shift that vertical line and deliberately change the price of money, that's its number one tool for steering the economy, for fighting inflation, or trying to prevent a recession. Which, of course, leaves us with an even bigger question. How exactly does pulling this one simple lever send ripples through the entire global economy?